Question number 7, Dr David Clark.
My question is to the Minister. Can the Minister tell the House the source of the typhoid outbreak that killed a 52-year-old Auckland woman, and if so, can he guarantee that the outbreak has been contained?
The Honourable Nicky Wagner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On behalf of the Minister, the source of this isolated typhoid outbreak is being investigated by the Auckland Regional Public Health, and I'm advised that clinically the response is being handled very well and that health officials are confident that the outbreak has been contained. As typhoid is not endemic to New Zealand, at some point the disease has come from overseas.
Supplementary question, Dr David Clark.
Supplementary question. After watching TV news and learning that his own officials were responding to a typhoid outbreak already nearly 2 weeks old, what precise actions did he take in the minutes that followed?
The Honourable Nicky Wagner.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister has made it very clear that there are some lessons to be learned regarding the communications. But as I've said, the advice is that clinically the response is being handled well, and the Minister is pleased to hear that.
Point of order.
Point of order, Dr David Clark.
Sir, my question was really clear about the immediate action that followed this finding out, and that's the issue at point.
Order. I heard the question very clearly, but when you consider it's being asked by another Minister on behalf, how could the Minister possibly know the precise action the Minister took after watching a particular news item? It cannot be answered any more accurately than it was. Further supplementaries?
Point of order.
Order. If there's going to be continued to be interjection, I'm going to have to start asking particular members to leave. I've given my ruling on that. If the member wants to raise a fresh point of order, he's more than welcome, but it better be a fresh point of order.
I seek the leave of the House to hold over the remainder of the questions for the next question time. So.
Well, you can't now do that because you've started the question. You can certainly cease. Order. You can certainly cease further supplementaries if you don't think it's worthwhile, and that was perfectly appropriate. But you can't now hold over the supplementaries associated with question 7 now that you've accepted that you've started question 7.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr David Clark.
When he found out about the typhoid outbreak on the 31st of March, what assurances did he immediately seek from health officials that relevant health organisations in the area were being communicated with about the outbreak?
The Honourable Nicky Wagner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On behalf of the Minister, I can't answer that directly, but what I can tell you that there will be a thorough debrief afterwards, and the questions around both the source of the outbreak and the response will be properly reviewed.
Point of order.
Point of order, Dr David.
I seek leave to table a paywall document that makes clear that the Chief Executive of the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency said that her organisation had not been contacted about providing messages to the public a week after the event.
Leave us sought to table that particular document. Is there any objection to it being tabled? There is none. It can be tabled.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr David Clark.
Who is responsible to this House for the health funding spent on dealing with the typhoid outbreak?
The Honourable Nicky Wagner.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, I think that will be decided through the thorough debrief afterwards, and where the questions will be looking at the sources about the outbreak and the response and who's responsible.
Point of order, sir.
Point of order, Dr David Clark.
How can that possibly be true, sir? She is responsible to this House for the spending of the House. That's the role of the Minister.
Order. I accept the point the member's making, but the Minister's answered that way. That's the way she's chosen to ask the question. The way forward now is for the member to follow up with supplementary questions.
Supplementary question.
Dr David Clark.
Well, does the Minister then take responsibility for the fact that Auckland Regional Public Health's funding has not kept pace with population growth in Auckland under his watch?
Yes. The Honourable Nicky Wagner.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, I know the member is new to health, and he may not be aware that normally in
order. It's order. No, I haven't. A legitimate supplementary question has been asked. the Minister would be well advised to address it without the comment about that she started the answer with, and then we might all be able to hear the answer. The Honourable Nicky Wagner.
Mr.
Order.
Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, the member may not be aware that in Auckland it normally handles about 30 cases of typhoid every year. It does it efficiently and effectively.
Point of order, sir.
Point of order. I'll invite the member to re-ask his question, but I'd be grateful for less interjection from my immediate left. Dr David Clark.
Does the Minister take responsibility for the fact that Auckland Regional Public Health's funding has not kept pace with population growth in Auckland under his watch?
The Honourable Nicky Wagner.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, that's not true. And the reason I have pointed out that every year Auckland manages about 30 cases of typhoid efficiently and effectively.
Point of order.
Point of order, Dr David Clark.
I seek leave to table material showing that the Auckland Regional Public Health funding has not kept pace with the population growth in Auckland under his watch.
I just need the source and date of the document.
Is, the Parliamentary Library, and it's sourced yesterday from the Parliamentary Library.
I will put the leave. The House will decide. Leave is sought to table that information from the Parliamentary Library. Is there any objection to it being tabled? There is not. It can be tabled. Question number 8, Marama Fox.